Good morning. This is Professor Marsh, and this is Unit 9 in Business Ethics at Newberry College in the fall of 2021. Uh, the, this is the first half of chapter number 7, and the topic is ethical decision making, technology, and privacy in the workplace. There's a cold opening that begins with being smart about smartphones. This really seems a little bit like a case about bad selling, a misunderstanding, and other issues than ethics. However, I would recommend that the sales employee suggest that we introduce each member of the team when we make a presentation for future clients, and also let them explain what they'll be doing in the meeting and on the job if the client hires them. That would correct the sales and misunderstanding problems, at least prospectively. I'm also going to recommend to the boss that we jointly call the CFO for the client and explain what was going on and what we're doing. I'd also later wonder why the boss didn't know what we were doing and tell the client already. And then I'd call back the other client immediately after agreeing on a plan with the boss. So that's how I would try to solve that situation. Although it sounds like they work in a place where communication is not as strong as it might otherwise be. Okay, that might be a cultural thing that they need to work on. The opening quotes, I don't like them, and so I'm going to suggest some other ones, which you will find in your notes and in the PowerPoint slides. All human beings have three lives: public, private, and secret. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the famous Colombian novelist, wrote that. Friends don't spy. True friendship is about privacy. The famous American novelist Stephen King wrote that. Privacy is one of the biggest problems in this electronic age. Andy Grove said that. Now, Andy Grove wasn't just the CEO of Intel. He was also Jewish and a Holocaust survivor hiding out in Hungary during the Second World War, and a refugee from communist Hungary in 1956 during the Cold War. Certainly privacy is one of the biggest problems in this electronic age. I think Andy Grove certainly knows why privacy is important. People are worried about privacy, and it's one of the reasons people are using a service like Snapchat. Peter Thiel, the founder of PayPal, and also the first investor in Facebook, said that. So a lot of stuff about technology and privacy in this chapter. So the chapter objectives. This is the first half, the first 5 objectives in chapter 7. Distinguish between two definitions of privacy. Ethical sources of privacy is a fundamental value. Legal sources of privacy protection, including the concept of a reasonable expectation of privacy. Recent developments in connection with employee monitoring, and failure to understand the implications of technology and its use. Defining privacy. So some define it as the right to be left alone. Some define it as the right to control information. In the workplace, some see a reciprocal obligation. The employer has an obligation to respect the goals and property. The employee has an obligation to respect the goals and property of the employer. The employer has a reciprocal obligation to respect the rights of the employee, sort of a contract principle, including the employee's right to privacy. So those are some definitions of privacy in the absolute, and then in the workplace. The ethical sources of privacy as a fundamental value begin with the reciprocal obligation, the idea that employers and employees need to respect each other's rights. There's also, some would say, a fundamental human right to
to privacy itself, and this is recognized in all sorts of philosophical literature over the years. Uh, Note hypernorms versus moral free space. Uh, is privacy a hypernorm? Is it a universally recognized right? Well, in free societies, typically so, not so much in the communist world. Uh, there's also a property rights theory that thoughts and ideas are private property of the thinker. Personal information is property, and you should be able to control it. So those are some of the ethical sources of privacy as a fundamental value. Now, legal sources of privacy protection, including the concept of a reasonable expectation of privacy. Now we're talking about Fourth Amendment protection, which only applies to state government action. That's about 15% of the workforce works for the government at some level. Uh, there's also the Electronic Communications Privacy Act of 1986, which is the anti-wiretapping and other interception of electronic communications or disclosure, misuse of electronic communications. So that's a 1986 Act of Congress. There's the concept of intrusion into seclusion, an intentional intrusion into the private affairs of another when intrusion would be highly offensive to a reasonable person. Think of the paparazzi or TMZ. TMC seems to only intercept and intrude into celebrities when they're at the airport or coming out of a restaurant or something like that in a public space. Ron Galella, who used to follow Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis around and try to take her picture, would use telephoto lenses and try to snap into in her backyard or try to get her at her office and places where maybe she had an expectation of privacy. Maybe it was intruding into a private space. So when you see those photographs that are taken of whoever, some celebrity, name your celebrity, on the beach and playing playing with their children and things like that, those maybe cross the line into situations that would be offensive to a reasonable person. And they're the subject of some litigation. Celebrities have sued. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis sued Ron Galella. That case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and Onassis's rights were upheld. Okay, what is a reasonable expectation of privacy? That's the basis for invasion of privacy claims. And it is eliminated when the individual is notified that information is not private or will be shared. So, as an employer and as a manager, if you are going to snoop on your employees on the job, you need to notify them to know that they do not have a reasonable expectation of privacy, perhaps in their emails or other communications that pass through the server of the employer. Note the table 7.1 on page 239 regarding the legal status of employee monitoring. When employees can access your electronic communications at work. And then also note table 7.2 regarding the European Union Privacy Shield. So privacy rights are different in other countries. Sometimes they're better protected, sometimes they're not. Recent developments in connection with employee monitoring. There's email monitoring, periodic or random review of email communications of employees or others for a variety of business purposes. And then there's also internet use monitoring, review or use of the internet by employees or others based on time spent or content accessed for a variety of business purposes. And actually, some of the large tech companies now have included internet use monitoring. As far as how productive are you at work, Microsoft seems to tell me, how much time I'm spending working and how much time I spend, surfing the internet when I turn on my computer at the office in the morning. And if I weren't the boss, perhaps they'd be sending a report to the
and that's I can understand situations in which you need to monitor your employees. I can understand the companies that have GPS on truck drivers and making sure that they're following the prescribed route and that sort of thing. And particularly for the ones who treat the drivers as employees. I'm not sure that that's appropriate for independent contractors. That might be a factor that would cause the IRS to reclassify the workers. But certainly, email monitoring. Sometimes you can have a security situation, and you need to monitor email to make sure that employees are not being careless or perhaps intentionally disclosing secret confidential information. That might be important if you work at Los Alamos or down at Goose Creek at the missile farm. So those are also situations in which email monitoring might be appropriate. Uh, but generally speaking, we don't do that. I've never done that with my law firm, even though we have a requirement for a high degree of confidentiality. But we treat our workers and our contractors as professionals, and we expect that. We have a strong cultural expectation that they will respect the privacy of the attorney-client relationship and the privacy of the attorney work product that is produced. And we haven't been disappointed with that expectation. It would be grounds for immediate termination in the legal field if you were to violate that. And on to the next topic, which is the fifth of our learning objectives in the first half of the chapter: failure to understand the implication of technology and its use. If we don't understand the technology, we might not understand the ethical implications of our decisions, and that's certainly true. You need to either develop your own knowledge of the technology you're using and what its security is, or you need to have a good IT consultant or IT department available to you so that they can explain it to you. How can we protect our private information? Well, we might not be able to unless we go to additional steps. Is it ethical to read employees' emails? So back to that again. Well, traditional law, it is legal. That's certainly what the case law is. Question whether or not it's ethical. I suspect that might be a situational type thing. As pointed out before, there are situations in which it might be ethical. There are certainly many situations in which it would not be. Note differing generations think differently about what is privacy. That's the reality check on page 249. Young versus old certainly have different thoughts about privacy. And note table 7-3. The prices at InfoCheck USA for information about others or about yourself, if you want to check yourself out, it's kind of interesting. There used to be that tech companies and services that provided electronic services used to have an ad in which people were sitting at a bar, and the bartender was selling the information to some guy about a cute girl who had just left for $10, and that was to perhaps be a metaphor for the disregard that companies like Facebook or now or Google have for selling your data to people who want to approach you in a way that you might think is inappropriate for purchasing something or perhaps just to get to know you better. But in any event, that's the first half of chapter 7. A little briefer than usual, but I know this is information that is something that you probably have as good a knowledge as I have on some of these issues, but we will delve into the topics in more depth when we get to Unit 10. So this is the end of Unit 9. At this point, we're basically caught up with the materials as presented in the syllabus. And so until next time, keep up with your reading. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, courses, please do so. You'll be notified as additional information is posted, and I'll also try to send out an email to the roster when we have additional developments. I know there are some assignments that are either due or coming due, so please keep up with that work as well. And we'll see you next time. Have a great day. Bye-bye.